Hello, I wanted to create this video today. I have fallen in love with working on a pin loom, but I found that a lot of other pin loom weavers have come to this craft from large scale weaving. So they already know about yarn, they already intuitively know a lot about the mistakes. So I had a learning curve. I'm just now learning to knit, so learning about yarns and things. So I wanted to share some of the things that might help you get up to speed quickly. This is what we're going to cover. So if you want to fast forward to something, you're welcome to do that. What I work primarily on is this is my Zoom loom from the Shot Company. Here's a list of some of the looms that I have found. I also found one time at an antique store a vintage Weave It loom that is, the Zoom loom is 4 by 4 inches. This one is 2 by 2 inches. And I've really enjoyed working with them both. The Zoom loom here that's 4-inch square will make squares that look like this. Some various sizes. Whereas the small one will create squares that are much smaller. Here's some in different colors and patterns. The neat thing is that you can put them together sort of patchwork style to create different patterns that please you. One of my most recent discoveries that I've been working on is this is the Weave It company created one that is 2 by 6 inches and creates squares that are actually rectangles and make great bookmarks. But these two can be put together with other weaving. So I can put these, match these up and sew them together with various sizes just to create different looks. So just know that there are different looms out there no matter what you've got. There are also instructions on how to make your own. And there are craftspeople on Etsy.com where you can purchase different types of looms that are ready to use. Okay, so let's talk about reading about pin looms. There was a lot of help out there that after I did some digging, I discovered. Adventures in Pin Loom Weaving is a blog by Sue Burton. There's also Easy Weaving with Little Looms is a magazine and newsletter. Modular Textures, Patterns for the Weave It Loom is a great book that is very helpful if you're looking to create different types of patterns with the Zoom loom. That will help you do that rather than just a plain textured square. There's also Margaret Stump and Olvina by Florencia Campos are good names to know about. Both of them do blogs and various things. The Olvina is from South America, and they're actually, you can purchase looms there. So those are good sources to know about. Sort of for some basics, I learned a lot from Spinning, Dyeing, and Weaving by Penny Walsh. The Knitter's Book of Yarn was also very helpful, as was the Hand Knitter's Yarn Guide. So I kind of figured out what kind of yarns worked for me, and things got really exciting after I learned more about yarn. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about choosing yarn, how you would want to do that. This is cotton yarn, and this was one of the first things I tried, and it was kind of disastrous because cotton is not stretchy, so it's really not forgiving. And by the time I would get sort of to the end of my square, it would be very tight and difficult to continue weaving. I quickly learned that acrylic was more forgiving, but that brought some other problems for me. It's not biodegradable, and that was something that was important to me. It takes about 200 years for plastic-based yarns to decompose, and I wanted something that was friendlier to the environment. I also cared about how well the sheep were treated. I care about whether the dyes are taken care of or just dumped onto the planet. I also really love that some of the dyes are by small craftsmen and mom and pop businesses out there. I love supporting those. So just know that if you get excited about those sort of things like I did, that you can do a little research online, or you can talk to the owners of yarn shops and they can help you find really well-sourced yarns. Wools are much more flexible than some of the acrylics. I discovered that in particular merino, cormo, and polwarth are great yarns to start with. So the type of yarn you choose is important, but so is the gauge or the size of the yarn. Here is a ball of yarn that I got in the bargain bin at my local yarn shop. The people who are finished with projects will donate their ends of yarn that they can't use, and they're sold for charity. Ours helps with the local homeless shelter. So I love to buy these scraps because then I am getting what I need and it's inexpensive and the money goes to charity. But I need to find out a little bit more about it first. And that's where this gauge tool really helps. The little between the notches here is 1 inch. And so what I have done is wrapped the yarn around this, and I've come up with comfortably 8. And that tells me what kind of yarn I'm working with here. And it's getting towards the thick side. Well, I've discovered that 8 is kind of pushing it. By the time the thread has to fit through multiple times, it gets a little tight when it's 8 gauge yarn. So I prefer to work with something a little less tight. And this is, let me show you when I'm finished weaving it. This thickness of yarn makes for a pretty thick square that's it's floppy, but it doesn't drape very well. Let me show you by contrast. Here is some yarn that I bought a few months ago on a trip to Scotland. And when I came home and I wrapped it, it ended up being about 18 wraps, which if you'll see here, it's really a lace yarn and probably was made for socks or something finer than that. But I find when I weave it, it makes a gorgeous square. But I think you can see that you can see my fingers through it. So what gauge you pick really makes a difference in how the squares drape. See how this one flops kind of easily? This would make this blue one would make a beautiful scarf or shawl, whereas this one would probably work better as a drink coaster or put together as placemats. So to know what gauge your yarn is helps you know if you're going to experience tightness problems towards the end, and also what you'd like to choose in terms of gauge for the project that you want. Okay, so let's talk a little bit also about forms of yarn or how it's stored. This is what's called a hank, and the yarn has just been twisted. It's very hard to work with yarn in a hank because it wants to just keep twisting back up and it will tangle badly. So when I buy yarn, and again, this is a very thin one, usually they're much thicker, I will ask my yarn shop to cake it for me. And so they turn it into, this is what a cake looks like. A lot of times we'll store the label down in the center so you have information about the yarn. But the great thing about a cake of yarn is it doesn't tangle easily. It also can be stored and dispensed. This is a yarn bowl, and a ball of yarn or a cake of yarn can easily be dispensed through this little spiral shaped here. So you can just keep working and pulling yarn as long as you need to. There's also a spindle. Some of these, this is a portable spindle, so this can actually hang from your wrist and you can pull the yarn and work as you go. They also have tabletop versions of these. So a cake works really nice with a bowl or with a spindle. One of the things I love about a cake is that sometimes when a yarn is very thin, I will double it. Here is an example of a square that, if you can see, I have doubled the yarn on it. So instead of 1 strand, it's 2. And when my yarn is caked, I have access to the yarn from the middle, and I also have an end around the side. So I can put the two ends together and begin weaving them from there and pull from both at once. And that allows me to double. If my yarn was in a ball, that would not be possible because even though there's an end to the yarn here, the other end is buried deep inside the ball. So I really like my yarn caked. Sometimes if I buy a hank and it's not in a cake, my local yarn shop will cake it for me. They have a caking service, and I believe it's around $1 per 100 yards that they charge, but it's well worth it to me if I've bought yarn on vacation and it's still in a hank. Okay, let's also talk about, in terms of choosing yarn, there's some problem yarns I found that I wanted to share a little bit about with you. One of the things that I love about the yarns is I love variegated yarns. So yarns that have a variety of colors. This length right here, it changes color very quickly. So in a finished square, I would have lots of different color. And like this square also was the same way. Some of the squares look really beautiful when you've had variegations because they turn into sort of a plaid pattern. I love that. To me, it's a little more interesting than just the solid colors there. But I quickly learned these are squares that I made all from a single skein that I bought in London. And I discovered after I got into weaving with it that it didn't change color very quickly. And it also had bits of color in odd places. So like this square isn't all yellow. It's got just a little bit of peach here. And this one has a tiny bit of blue that usually didn't come in till later. So it makes some of those squares look almost dirty. That was not my most successful skein. So now, like this one, you've got this random streak of blue. So now when I purchase yarn, I try to figure out if it changes color very quickly just by looking at it. So that's one of the things I do. I've also learned that yarn that's very mottled, to me, doesn't make a very interesting square. I love it when I can see the weaving or when it has the nice variegations in it. But when the yarn is just kind of mottled, to me, it's rather boring. But please don't let my 2 cents bother you. Maybe that's exactly the look you're going for. But I tend to look for yarns where I can really see the weave, and I love the variegations. One other thing to be careful about is this is chenille, and it felt really nice, and it was easy, and it draped nicely. But by the time I got to the end, the yarn was actually fraying and pulling apart. It couldn't handle the weaving process. So unfortunately, I don't think I will be using chenille anytime in the future. Here's a couple of other problem yarns. This one is also a little too thick to be used on the pin loom, but even if it was twisted tightly, it comes undone easily, so it's easy for your needle to pierce it while weaving. So that's not something I want to work with. This yarn had a pleasing zigzag to it, but I found that it actually has a very hard, unflexible center cord on it that made it hard to weave with, and the pattern was not pleasing. This sort of gets lost in the loom and just looked like a mess. So the smooth yarns, I think, worked a lot better. And then finally, this was, someone gave me this, and it has little plastic beads that are attached to the yarn. I've been told that they're called twinkles, but I discovered that when you're trying to weave, the twinkles may work fine with crocheting or knitting, but they get caught in the loom, and so that is something I will not pick again. And then one of the last things, I found this yarn that was really beautiful and a nice color. But when you see it kind of balled together, you see it's very fuzzy. This would be great if you wanted to finish a square and felt it, But otherwise, it was tangly. It got stuck on itself. It was not a pleasant yarn to work with. So yarns where this comes out very easily is not what I would pick for my loom. But again, please don't let any of this deter you. Maybe this is exactly the look you're going for. So just know that's something to think about. This yarn somebody gave me, it almost looks like ramen noodles, and it's very stretchy. And I found that once it was woven, it was easy to weave, but it came out smaller than your average square because it bounced into shape. So maybe that's exactly the look you're going for, but just know that it's going to end up smaller if you choose a yarn that's very, very noodly and stretchy. And then probably one of the last things I'll tell you about choosing yarn, I like garage sales and thrift stores. I don't know how that yarn has been preserved or stored. So it doesn't hurt to do a 333 yarn protection process. You put the yarn, just the whole thing, into the deep freeze for 3 days. That kills any live insects, things like moths or bed bugs or lice. It kills them off, and then you take it out, but put it in a large plastic bag. That will encourage any insects that were in there as eggs will think, oh, it's springtime, and they'll hatch. Then you put it back for 3 days in the deep freeze, and anything that is hatched will die off. So I'm told that this is a good process to make sure that your yarn is safe. Now, the last thing you want is bed bugs or moths through your house just from bringing home some yarn. Okay, so that brings us to how about some weaving problems here. There were some things that drove me crazy when I first started weaving on the pin loom, and maybe I can help you get past those fast so you don't suffer with them as long as I did. My most frustrating problem was this. Sometimes I would get done and I would pull it off the loom, and there'd be this, it almost looked like a little purse, this long loop. Couldn't figure out for the life of me why that was happening. Well, let me show you. This is a weaving that it looks like I'm done. Here's my tail that's tucked into there. And look, I'm all the way to the top, so I'm done, right? Nope. There is actually room to move this thread down and to do one last, I won't do it so because it would take some time, but I would weave it through one more time. And when I was done with that weaving, this tail and this tail will be at opposite corners, and that's exactly what you want when you're done. That means that all of these ends are tucked in, that it will not come loose like this. So look for that. You want it to be on opposite corners. Then one of the other things that frustrated me was, even though the Zoom loom makes this nice little notch here to keep your yarn a little bit out of the way, I still found I was weaving it in sometimes. So now I kind of tuck it in after I've done several back and forths. I will tuck this in and kind of go back and forth, just tucking it in out of my way so that that's not loose anymore. And that was handy. And then finally, the last little trick that helped me a lot is when you're weaving and you're ready to start pulling your thread through, sometimes the loop of thread, let's see if I can pull this through, it will can get sort of accidentally looped around some of these pins. And then you have to stop and try to figure out what to move. Well, I've discovered as you're ready to pull, put your thumb over the pins where you're pulling. So the last of my thread is here in this corner. As I pull, I'm putting my thumb there. Then no thread can get over those pins, and that just helps it from getting tangled. All right, so those are good tricks with some of the weaving problems that I came across. So let's talk about transporting the loom. I love how portable this thing is, and I have been making squares at church and at concerts. I took a long international flight, and I took everything I needed in this box. This is a Japanese craft box that I found. It kind of looks like a lunch box with a latch on the front, and it's got this pop-up handle that's really handy. Let me show you what it looks like inside. I will keep my loom folded inside a cloth at the top. So even though it wasn't in there right now, this is how I put it to bed in the top of this box in a napkin. That protects the pins and cushions them a little bit. Inside, I have 2 flat boxes, and these are kind of the kind of boxes that they're made for storing 4x6 photos. In the top box, I keep most of my tools, and I've got, let me show you what I've got in here. I've got a pen, I've got my needles, and I always carry extras. I carry darning needles and also my extra pins for the pin loom in case one of them gets lost. I carry my scissors. In case things get really tight on the loom, this is a peg loom tool, and I find it is super helpful if you're weaving along and things get tight. You can use it to move threads aside, or especially on these end pieces, you can kind of move things to see what's going on. And I carry a thimble for the same reason. If I need to kind of push my needle through in some place, I can do that. One of the best tools I found is called, this is a tail end weaver. And you can see that it has a much bigger loop than most threaders. So it fits in the weaving needle very easily. And then it makes it just a snap to put your yarn onto your needle. Super quick and easy. I keep several of these in case I drop one. I've got extras. So that's in the top. In the bottom, I will carry pre-cut yarn. So these are 8 yards wrapped around a little card. These are made for embroidery thread, but this is a bigger size than the standard embroidery thread. And then this is just a ponytail holder that I will put around it to keep the yarn from coming off. The Zoom loom will tell you that it takes 8 yards, but it's actually 7 yards, 16 inches. So rather than waste a little bit of yarn, that's how much I try to carry with me. And then you'll see here along the side, I found that as I was traveling, let me flip it around here so you can see it better. I was leaving bits of yarn in my wake everywhere I went. So I bought off of Etsy this little yarn keeper that it pops open and can sit on a desktop, or it kind of folds to fit on the side here. One of the nicest things about this box is that the lid is hinged so that the whole box will sit nicely in my lap while I work. So that's how I carry my Zoom loom, and again, I will wrap it in a cloth napkin just to cushion it a little bit, and it goes inside the box after I latch it. I then went to a hiking shop and I bought webbing and buckles. Sewing shops will have these too. And I made a buckle to go on this box, so if someday I am running down through the airport to make my flight, that my box can't accidentally pop open. So that's how I carry my stuff most of the time. I do have some bigger knitting bags for if I don't have time to cut the yarn and I want to carry a bunch of cakes of yarn with me. I just throw them in a knitting bag. Okay, so the last thing is sort of what do I do with what I made? And in terms of the different projects you can make, I would go back to these books and blogs. Have a lot of projects that you can do. But I wanted to let you know that the squares are really easy to mail. These are some 5x7 envelopes I bought in different colors. And a lot of times if a friend is having a bad day or they're celebrating some milestone, I will make them a coaster to use with their mug of coffee and mail it in a colored envelope. The post office says that if an envelope contains anything but paper, it's officially a parcel. So you have to add extra postage to it, but it's really easy to mail. So that's a nice thing to send to people. And then I also wanted to show you, this is a photo album for 5x7 photos, but I've used it to some of my favorite yarns. I've kept samples and also kept some of the labels from the yarn. So if I want to go back to favorite yarns, I know where to go and what to do. So I hope that this video has been helpful, and I appreciate your time. Happy weaving.